Hey, Union! I am John Tomlin.
And I'm Susie Griffin, and you're watching Knees on the U.
Thank you very much for watching. We all appreciate the viewership. So as most of you know, Mike Huckabee visited our campus on Monday, April 14th. It was a very good get for the Speakers Forum and everyone else who put it on. What happened during the speech, there was a question and answer period, and one of the biggest issues for Union students was gay marriage. Mike Huckabee is against gay marriage. He thinks marriage is a union between a man and a woman, and doesn't believe that two women or two men should get married. So take a listen. One of our reporters asked Mike Huckabee a question about gay marriage and his opposition to it. Check it out.
What would you say to the thousands of families out there who they have children, same-sex marriages, however, they aren't supported by their government? They have a greater potential for the families to break apart. What do you say to people like them, especially when you talk so much about, everyone is created equal, everyone has this self-worth and virtue? What do you say to them? And more specifically, what would you say to someone like me?
I would say to the families, you give unconditional love to your family. You give unconditional love, so you don't love them because of choices they make or choices that don't please you. You love them unconditionally. And if you have a son or daughter who lives a lifestyle that is not exactly yours, you love them. That doesn't mean that you have to say, okay, we're going to re-engineer the whole definition of marriage because you've made choices that are not in the mainstream of the choice that is traditionally been associated with this institution called marriage. And the question is not, do people have a right to live differently? They do. The question is, do they have a right to impose their views of marriage by changing the entire definition of it in order to accommodate their choices as opposed to somebody else's?
Would everyone in this country really be equal if they weren't all given the same opportunities?
It's not about the equality of their intrinsic worth. Their intrinsic worth as an individual is absolute. But we're not talking about their worth as an individual. We're talking about now a choice about a mate, a choice about a lifestyle, a choice about a social structure, and that's different. And I don't mean to stretch this to some bizarre way, but if I chose to say that, in fact, I'm not going to use that analogy because it always breaks down and people get angry if I do. If I say, if people can choose to say, I want to live with a person of the same sex, where do the choices stop? If somebody else wants to make a choice that's even more outside the mainstream than that, do we accommodate them as well? And at what point do we stop accommodating, and who gets to make that decision? That's the point. You have to at some point say, marriage means this. It doesn't mean everything, or then it doesn't mean anything. And so what marriage has always meant was one man, one woman, recreating the next generation and training replacements. And if it starts meaning something else, if we as a society decide to change that definition, we can do that. But once we've changed it, we open the door to making other changes that could be just as different and as radical, and then there would be no real basis upon which to say, wait a minute, we shouldn't do it. Let me ask this question. Should people be allowed to have multiple wives? Is polygamy okay? No. People practice polygamy. We're seeing it in Texas. My question is, why should we impose a standard that says you can't practice polygamy? Now, to the polygamists, they believe that's perfectly okay. Do we have a right to impose our mores on the people who practice polygamy? Most people say, well, that's not right. Who says it isn't? They say it is. It goes back to my point that once you've opened the door and have decided that marriage doesn't just mean one man, one woman, it can mean one woman and another woman, one man and another man, or it can mean one man and several women, or one woman and several men. Why can't it mean those things?
Now, Susie got a chance to get John's reaction to this whole question and in an interview she did with him, so check this out.
I would just like everyone to know that when I asked my question to Mike Huckabee, I was coming from a good place. I did not mean to be disrespectful at all. Mm-hmm. I think I shared my point very, politically firm, but, never disrespectful, and I hope that Mike thought that and realized that I wasn't trying to attack him. I remember that another thing he said in his speech was that, these people in power are here for us, and they're we have to ask these questions, not what do you believe, but why do you believe them? And I think that question sort of reflected that. I felt more comfortable asking the question because he opened himself up to that, and I think in turn I even respected him more as a result.
Yeah.
I was actually going to ask the question that I asked at the dinner and with him to get like a one-on-one response, and I was extremely disappointed that I didn't get to ask him, but at the same time I realized after the dinner had happened that probably wouldn't have been the best place to do it, and no one really asked him any of those types of questions because, you know, we were all kind of having fun with each other. We were talking about his experience on Saturday Night Live and everything like that, so it was just a very casual meal. It wasn't a lot of politics, it wasn't a lot of, you know, but I thought during his speech, I did really like the fact how he kept referring that everyone has this own sort of, we all have this self-worth, and that no man should be left behind, and that everyone should be created equal and everything like that. And I thought that those are all great. I just wasn't sure how much of that was reflected in his political views.
So Susie, I didn't realize that gay marriage was such a big issue for students on this college. I mean, most of the questions that people were posing were about gay marriage. You know, did you notice that?
Yeah, well, to me it makes perfect sense. I think that our generation is much more open, and we all have friends that are gay, so it's like, this actually really affects our friends.
Right. Yeah.
And the people that, you know.
Do you understand his argument? His argument is that if you open the door to gay marriage, you also open the door for polygamists to say, hey, why can't we have multiple wives? Do you understand that? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think, okay, I think this is a great point made by Mike Huckabee, because if we decide, and this is something, I do believe in gay rights, so I hope I don't like misrepresent myself at all, but I know I'm going to, so here goes. I think that by giving a law that would allow gay marriage to go ahead, that then cuts a precedent for every other kind of marriage to exist. And so Mike Huckabee's point was, well, where does it stop? Like, what if, you know, years and years from now a man wants to marry an animal? Well, he can always say that when Mike Huckabee was governor, he let two gay people get married.
Right.
So, I mean, it makes sense. I understand his logic. It doesn't mean I agree with it, but it makes perfect sense. What do you think?
Well, I am a pro-gay marriage guy, so to me the polygamist argument doesn't really make any sense, because I see marriage as a union between two people. He sees it as a union between a man and a woman, but in no way, you know, since it's just a union between two people, in my view, I don't think that opens the door for multiple partners. You know, and I know a lot of people say that it's the precedent. You know, you set the precedent, and then when do you draw the line? You know, it gets kind of hairy if you keep changing things. But I don't know. I just sort of.
It's just a tough call. It's a really. It's like, I don't know. No matter what you do, there's always going to be an issue like this, and there's nothing you can do or say to make it better.
Right.
Because there's always going to be someone else who has to suffer these same consequences.
Yeah.
So.